Welcome, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast, coming to you from the Podvlog studio in St. George, Utah, and produced by Markel-Consulting, LLC. I'm your host, Dave Markel. Hello, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. Before I introduce you to my guest this week, I want to invite you to be on my show. If you're a victim or survivor of rape or sexual assault, or interpersonal violence of any kind, actually, I want to talk to you about the possibility of being a guest on this podcast. Start by emailing me at davemarkel@gmail.com. That's DAVEMARKEL@gmail.com. And let's discuss the possibility of sharing your story. It's you that this podcast is all about. And if you're in a place emotionally and physically where you're ready to share that story, I'm here for you. Let's talk. This is episode 29. My guest this week is Carrie Elizabeth Grant, and she did exactly what I'm asking you to do. She reached out to me after we first met as colleagues of the Jan Broberg Foundation and told me that she would be available to be a guest on the SAS podcast. Several months later, when I reached out to her to see if she was willing to still be on this show, she didn't hesitate, even for a second. Although Carrie struggles every day with the difficult memories and negative thoughts that try to push their way into her mind, Carrie fights back in a determined way. I believe as you listen to Carrie tell her story that you'll hear how determined she is to continue pushing back in order to make an impact, reduce the prevalence of rape and sexual assault, and help others in their struggle to do the same. Carrie is doing all she can to help bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault, and I appreciate the fact that she was willing to let me interview her. Here's Carrie. Carrie Grant, welcome to Sexual Assault Survivor Stories. It's great having you here, and I really appreciate you being willing to join me on the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, Dave.
Let's give our audience a little bit of background on how we even connected. You want to tell a little bit about that?
Well, I heard about this series one day on Peacock, a friend of the family, and I had my friend tell me what it was about, and I wanted to see if maybe it might be something that was triggering or anything, and she told me what it was about, and I thought I'm going to go ahead and watch this, and after I watched it, it resonated with me of, some of my childhood stuff, and I contacted Jan Broberg. One thing led to another where I was volunteering for her, and that's how I started talking to you.
Well,
and we're all still in contact. So
that's great. I had heard part of your story, but not all of it. And just what little I heard made me extremely interested in the possibility of you being a guest on this show. And so I appreciate your willingness to do this and to kind of talk somewhat about your experience. If you don't mind, let's kind of just dive right into it. What are you able to tell us about your experience with sexual abuse and sexual assault?
yeah, my history is extensive. I was adopted by some neighbors that lived next door to my birth mom. It was finalized around age 2.5, which is when really my memory starts. My mom and my dad, my new parents, were both abusive in different ways. So my mom was violent and there was neglect. And then my dad was coming in the room at night and sexually assaulting me. And later in my story is other kinds of, domestic violence as an adult. Well, as a teenager, a guy followed me home when I was 14. I was exactly what a predator looks for, because I was about a year later, I was just pretty much despondent. Now I wasn't living in that 24-hour fear anymore. And I just went into a depression and I just walked back and forth to school and walked slow. Even though I knew where I was going, I looked lost. I think, because I really was just a perfect target. He followed me and my house was locked of all times. My mom was almost always home. She happened to not be home. I didn't know, I was not a person that was allowed to react to abuse. So I didn't scream or run or, I just sat on the grass. He sat on the grass too. He went to kiss me and I turned my head. That's about all that I could do, and I think he came to his senses and he got up and he left. I would estimate him to be in his 30s, but I don't know. I was 14. And anyway, backtracking on the childhood stuff. I just wanted to throw that in there as what happens to us, what we endure in childhood sets us up later to continue to be victimized. But it all ties in together. What I would like to focus on is what my behaviors were as a result of what was going on at home, as far as feeling so trapped and always feeling in fear. And some of my outlets started to be, I started to steal in first grade from a store right by my elementary school. I would go there every day, and I started just stealing candy because I wasn't being fed. There was no snacks or, anything. So I would steal candy. In fact, in first grade, the teacher was finally on to me and had to have two people wait for me to leave the class because I was waiting till everyone, I was the last person out for recess so I could get this candy. And then, like I said, from the stores every day, that's what I was living off of. Pretty much was candy. And I was also, the other things that I was stealing in that time is while my mom and dad and brother were all out watching TV in the evening, I wasn't invited out. I had to stay in my room a lot. And part of that was my mom would beat me otherwise, and they're all out there watching TV and laughing and whatnot. Their room was right across from mine. I would sneak in there and steal money out of my dad's pants pockets. And then there was a closet right by there, and I would steal dog and cat food out of there, dry cat and dog food, and bring it back to my room and eat that. And so all throughout elementary school, I was lighting little fires, different places in the neighborhood. I loved lighting fires. Nothing bad, resulted out of that. I wasn't lighting anything too dangerous, but I would also like to get a magnifying glass, kill bugs, burn them, hold that light on them until they died. That's the stuff I was doing in elementary school. It started to really increase. It's a good thing it stopped because I was starting to, for a year there, 5th to 6th grade, I kind of bullied a couple girls into giving me their lunch. It's never really been my thing, but it was really starting to come out that way, where I was starting to lash out at others. And fortunately, the 2 times that I punched somebody, the parents got involved. So the parents come over with the child and all that. And it really was like I like to do the things that I don't get in trouble for. Maybe you can get in trouble, but you don't, like stealing from, My mom went to hit me one day. We were outside, and I was taller than her now. She was only 5 foot tall. I was taller than her, and I went to block her, and something happened where she started to go to a counselor right after that. And that's what she told them, they had to report to the authorities. And the authorities came to my school, my junior high, and asked if I wanted to press charges against her. And I said, no. What am I supposed to say? I also was very shy and quiet until after high school. So, and they asked me one more time, do you want to press charges? I said no. And that was that. What my dad had been doing got tucked away into my brain somewhere, in the back of my mind somewhere around that time. However, the body keeps the score. And so the first time a boy, touched me, the first time we're kissing and he touched me, it hurt. And I told him it hurt. He said, it's supposed to feel good. And I just thought in my head, I'm fucked. And it would be up until the end of 2016 when the memories started to surface. But in the meantime, I had the issues of being touched, issues being naked. Fortunately, I didn't have to do PE in high school because I was in marching band. So I got out of PE, but I did have to do PE in junior high, and I would not change in there. I would go across the quad to a bathroom by the band room, which I would go in there, I would change, I would put my clothes behind the toilet, and then I would go out to PE because I didn't want anyone to see me change. And stuff like that, that shame, and like I said, even though I didn't have memories, that it was tucked away and I didn't know why. It was very severe. I would wear lots of clothes, even when it was summer, and I'm walking to and from school in high school, I would cover my body, and that was a constant ongoing thing as well. So
it's a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can tell just by listening to you that the trauma is still there. What can you tell us about some of the mindset that you had in blocking those memories? Good question. I really thought when the abuse stopped, as far as the physical and sexual, I started puberty, and I told my mom that I thought something had happened to me. I thought I had been sexually violated. This is just the way the mind works is just baffling, but also marvelous.
I mean, it was this definite safety mechanism. And I am grateful that my brain was able to compartmentalize that stuff so I could function. I could function well enough, to do school, and whatnot. But I told her, I think something happened. She took me to the doctor and they, performed an examination and said the hymen was intact, whatever, and it seemed okay. I remember walking back to the car with her and it just seemed like she knew, that was that. And that was the end of that topic. In my early 20s, I want to say, I started telling people that I was molested, but I didn't remember by who. After a while, I thought that sounded pretty dumb, that I don't know who, and I just stopped talking about it at all. And then for a little while, I tried to remember, which is impossible. You can't sit, and that's not how it works. And you should just start making stuff up. And my dad did not cross my mind. Even when I was trying to come up with something, didn't cross my mind, because that doesn't fit with how it should be, right? How family is supposed to be, what's supposed to happen. That would not be a thing that's supposed to happen. So my mind didn't come up with that as even a possibility. The other ways that manifested what I now know is a manifestation of that trauma is that I got myself into a lot of situations that was coerced. I mean, it was just the simplest thing could be said, because I had no bodily autonomy. I had zero, right? I had no rights to my body, not any of it growing up, not anything at all. I had no rights to I had no options of anything. I couldn't get my own food, or my body was not mine too. All the signals were crossed. And so even going forward on high school, I really essentially had no connection to appetite. I weighed 96 pounds in high school. I'm a lot better. I finally learned cooking food and able to take care of myself. That hasn't been for very long. That disconnect was so strong on just disconnect from my body, from the signals from it was so long that it's just baffling, the level of trauma and the impact it has on the mind and body. And one of the biggest things, like I said, I didn't have bodily autonomy. So technically I was promiscuous. I was on this chat line. I don't even know how old I was. I was a teenager, and I would go meet some stranger guy, from that thing, and I go and do whatever. I'm not sure that I remember even now all of that. I tried to kind of remember. It's just baffling. Older, a 55-year-old. I was 16. Which I haven't necessarily talked about because that was so far back when I started to get into partying, which was after high school. Then that's a whole nother pile of situations. And right away in the first year, there was a couple of rapes between 18 and 19. It was within a year, and those were drug and alcohol related. But that's definitely something that I had to work through later, is that, okay, I put myself in a situation that doesn't make it my fault. But I did definitely compartmentalize again then. That's the first time that had happened where, okay, it's one thing to coerce or just to not feel like you're allowed to say no is different than flat out, wait, let me take my gun out of my pants and put it on the table and, violently rape. So I compartmentalized. I chopped my hair. I started dressing like a boy again, like I did kind of in elementary school. And I started dating girls. And I was a completely different person than I was in high school. And anybody that knows me, because I still know people from elementary school and high school, but anybody that knew me then, I was a completely other person at 19. You wouldn't even be like, no one would even know that person was the person that was high school. Completely different people, because now I've split again, which we have talked about in a roundabout way, but dissociative identity disorder, and that was a definite split there.
Carrie, if I can ask, when you think back to those horrific, traumatic days and where you are today, what do you see as your healing path for all of that trauma?
For today, I purposely allowed myself to be in this mindset for this so that I could really dig in, because I don't live there anymore at all. And so it's some of the stuff I'm doing on Instagram with the healing and stuff. It's like, well, as far as, oh, I've healed, but from what,
Yeah.
And, just a couple words it doesn't paint necessarily a good picture. And I wanted to put myself in this. So I'm definitely comfortable, and I'm very glad to be doing this interview. And so, yeah, let's get on to that, the healing path. Some of what helped, I've been to thousands of AA meetings, Alcoholics Anonymous. Not everybody gains self-awareness from that. I mean, it's pretty hard, and it took a while, and it took a lot of, you really have to try to work on yourself at all. And sometimes it's pretty hardcore when you're learning things about yourself and your behaviors. It's really hard to feel like the way that you behave, that you have anything to do with it, right? Like the world owes me, like, no, you don't understand what's happened to me in my life. Anybody would act this way, and all the ways that I acted out. I used to break things, and people had to walk on eggshells all the time. In fact, my best friend, I've wanted to apologize to her for this. She went to a different high school, and we wrote letters to each other, and we talked all the time, and had this ridiculous bond, except I have more of the attachment obsession style. She was in the passenger seat of my car, and I was driving as fast as I could toward a brick wall. That's how I treated people that love me. Of course, I stopped right before the wall. Coming to self-awareness of how you're affecting others, regardless of what has happened to you and the trauma you've been to, is really hard to face. I understand on a level why people want to have the cognitive dissonance, and they might realize for a second, but they just go back into denial or whatever, because it's hardcore. It's hardcore to take responsibility for your own behavior and the way that you're treating people and the way that you act, regardless of the reasons, and so Alcoholics Anonymous really helped all those thousands of meetings, and listening and coming into slow acceptance of there being anything wrong with my behaviors, and that it's my responsibility. How I treat people is on me, regardless, like I said, of what happened to me. And, the people that love me over the years, that genuinely love me, that I mistreated, none of that love, though, was in vain. I really feel like all the attempts people made to try to love me, even though I was horrible to them, and even though I couldn't feel it at the time, I couldn't understand it, I didn't believe it. I did not believe anybody who said they loved me. And, looking in hindsight, all the evidence, but I could not feel it. I did not believe it. All of that helped, I think, ultimately for me to this point. A lot of people love me. And there's some people gave up on me as I kept trying to get clean and sober, off and on. Some people gave up, and I don't blame them, but also some people didn't give up, mostly myself. But I have friends that did not give up. Ooh, this is more emotional than I thought it would be, but not in a bad way. And that helped beyond measure to start the path, is to have that love seep in. I'm like, okay, that's real love. There is such a thing as love. And that helped me to start to be able to love myself, which wasn't even a thing that's not even a concept that I could grasp. I heard it over the years, you can't love anyone until you love yourself. What? Back in the day, it was obsession. It was attachment. It was so that we stopped talking. I feel like I'm going to die from not being able to talk to them. That's not love. I didn't know that. That was what I thought love was. Mm-hmm. I'm going to die without them. I can still feel that feeling. It's terrible to have that attachment onto somebody, even if you barely know them. Yeah. Right? You're like in love and whatever. And that attachment like that, I thought was love. And so going back to the healing, it was just bits and pieces, little snail movements towards it, and the biggest breakthrough, I guess, was where the memory started. And not everybody believes that they need to remember in order to heal from it. I don't know if I could have come about it in any other way, but that's just my stories. That helped to awaken more self-awareness.
We're both somewhat educated on what you've been through. You're obviously well read based on some of the stuff that I've seen you post. So
articulation is not my strong point. Verbally articulating, I sometimes I can't even do it writing, but I do a little. I convey myself. I feel like a little more linear.
Well,
when
yeah,
I
and that makes sense too,
type.
because writing is a different part of your brain than articulating orally. Plus, it gives you a chance to reread what you've written and you can edit yourself. That's
Right,
important, and you can't always do that when you're trying to tell a linear story or some continuity and a continuum of your life. It's
right,
especially
right.
like with you, full of trauma and never having been taught what love is and what it means to have a true emotional attachment other than just a panic attachment. You're doing amazing,
The
Carrie.
desperation, like that kind of attachment style was like the separation anxiety, but like you're just on the floor holding their leg, like, don't leave.
Yeah.
That's, yeah, it's so hard to explain, but I just had no idea. It's so not, it's barely related love,
Hmm.
but I had to start loving myself.
So do you relate in your own emotional response to this trauma, body keeping the score, these physical and emotional feelings? Do they make sense to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, education has definitely helped. Education about the effects of trauma, education about, basically all things psychology is what I studied to help me understand people, period, but that trauma affects you in the way that can come out. So some people, they abuse people the way that they were abused, right? And not everybody does that, fortunately, but, just all the aspects. The education is definitely, I feel like I wouldn't be anywhere close to any kind of level of healing, to be honest, if I didn't have that. I mean, I really dove in shortly after the memory started. I mean, it was like my brain was so on fire anyway. I was like, between flashbacks, memories, triggers. And then when I would go to sleep and I would wake, I mean, I was like thinking in my dreaming, and I would, and I wrote stuff frantically that I've since lost. It didn't matter. I just had to get it out. I would wake up and my mind was in the middle of a sentence, in the middle of a paragraph. Like never in my life am I thinking and writing like what, but I mean, it was hardcore. And so I started diving into reading. And like I said, just all things trauma. There's a book called Secret Survivors
Mhm.
that I read, and like the body keeps the score. And then also, like I said, just all things psychology, all diagnoses, all things psychology. I need to just understand. I need to understand. And that was one of the first places my mind went to that helped propel me wanting to educate myself is how can this even happen? How does the scenario even happen?
Yeah.
And so I want to understand people that are abusive, in that way. I wanted to try to dive into why a grown man would do that. I want to understand why a grown woman would do this to a child. I just wanted to understand everything possible about people and how the mind works, and so that has definitely helped. I just don't think you can ever learn too much,
Yeah.
And I still continue to read.
Which is evident in the things that you post online and in your social media. You seem to have a really good grasp then of some of the psychology that you've just mentioned in recognizing of yourself, but also of other people, what they need in terms of that healing process. So I admire you for all the work that you have put in and for what you're posting and things like that. I want to go back a little bit to what we talked about even before the recording began, just in talking about being a guest on the show and some of the things that have impacted your life. And that is the realization that just because you've been through trauma doesn't make you trauma informed. Can you speak to that and how that has impacted your life and those people that you think try to talk about being trauma informed when really they aren't?
Okay, yeah, trauma informed, that term's I've noticed it was being thrown around a lot. And just because you've been through trauma doesn't make you trauma informed. I was staying at a shelter in Astoria, Oregon, and they claimed to be trauma informed. I got re-traumatized a lot when I stayed there. The employees and volunteers were primarily victims of childhood sexual abuse and other types of abuse. But it was also kind of this shelter / re-entry program for people out of prison and jail. And then also there was some people staying there hiding from their abuser, right? Like a domestic violence shelter kind of thing. And there was this mix. So right there, as far as it being, trauma informed and a safe, healing environment, not sure that was a good claim to be, at the top of their list of trauma informed because it should be a safe place. If establishment, a professional, anybody is going to claim to be trauma informed, then they're ideally not going to be re-traumatizing people. And anyone claiming to be trauma informed who doesn't know what that means, then could just go study it. But that pretty much goes hand in hand, that if you're trauma informed, you're going to work hard and to not re-traumatize, you're going to know what that term means.
Right. And that's a big part of my whole education process and the trainings that I do, and what this podcast is set up for is to help people understand what it means to be trauma informed in the immediate sense that you're not doing any further harm to whoever you're talking to. And that to be trauma informed is to understand the neuroscience of the brain, how trauma affects us, what those trauma impacts are, and how to not re-trigger trauma, but to offer paths of healing and openness and awareness. I guess that's what I think I see you emphasizing, is to be trauma informed, to know what those neuro impacts are, to know what the trauma does to the brain neurologically, and how that's different than our mind. Our brain is different than what we think.
Right.
Because there's so much that our brain is doing that we have no idea why our brain is doing it. But you have to be sensitive to all of that, which is, again, one of the reasons when I talk to people, I ask them, what are you able to tell me about your experience? The concept behind that question is to give the person who is responding to that the thought process that they don't have to talk about anything if they don't want to. What are you able to tell me about your experience? Gives them a load of options. And so if they decide to talk about their trauma, it's because they feel capable of talking about their trauma, not because they feel forced to talk about their trauma, not because they have to feel like they have to relive that trauma. And just like with you, making a point to stop or pause and think about what it is that you are going to say so as not to make yourself even more emotional or feeling more of what you're feeling is a critical part to being trauma informed. I think that's very advanced thinking on your part to have gotten where you are.
Part of it is those experiences, perhaps, of place I was talking about, because that was really at the height of some of my triggers. Like I said, I was re-traumatized there. I mean, it was not a safe place at all. They ask when people, before they start staying there, they have a questionnaire, and one of them is, are you a sex offender? And you just say yes or no. And they don't do background checks. And they said, well, the police department checks it. Anybody that needs a place to stay would have pretty good incentive to lie to get to stay there. You just say yes or no. Well, who's going to say yes? And I remember one day there was cameras, all throughout, but there are children staying there. One day there was a couple of the guys that were staying there, out there on the bench in the smoking area, casually talking about rape, male rape. That's the kind of stuff. I was getting homicidal there on occasion. In fact, one day, from the stuff going on there and the triggers that were greatly amplified, I started following some random guy walking down. I started walking down this path, and there was a guy, and I had this little metal bar with me, and I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know what I was like. What am I trying to make him think? I have no idea. I was homicidal. It was scaring me. I was scaring myself, Don't encourage people to tell you about their trauma, the employees and stuff, if you're going to have that kind of environment for the people to stay in. Just what a clash. I'm, end up in prison. And I'm not saying, it would have been on me, right? That would have been my action, but it really matters a lot.
It really does.
That much. It matters that much. But fortunately, I am naturally not a violent person, and nothing happened. And I actually shortly thereafter, after I left there, within a couple months, I came to the forgiveness, my dad, and that all went away. I did backtrack a little. I was homicidal towards him there for a couple years, and I had to make sure for myself that I wasn't living in California because I wanted to burn his house down. And I pictured it many times, and I probably would not have done it, right? But I just couldn't trust myself while I was going through all triggers at the forefront of my mind. It was a really wild nightmare ride, Like I said, the trauma-informed thing is really important. It's really important.
Are you able to, what do you hope to have come out of this interview, and why you wanted to be able to tell your story?
What the statistics right now are, and since I started researching, they haven't changed, right? So that was getting into the education in 2017. This is 2023, and the statistics are still the same, which is about 1 in 3 girls before they're 18 and about 1 in 6 boys before they're 18 to be sexually assaulted. That's just childhood stuff. That doesn't even count the statistics on physical abuse and neglect and domestic violence, rape. I mean, this is the problem is astronomical. Like nothing is changing, despite people are being more vocal about it, online. But what are the news stories you see as far as, let's say, for example, a child sex offender? What are you going to see on TV? The doctor, because it took 300 people to report it for anyone to believe anybody, and and then you might see a worker that on his shift snatched up a little girl into the truck. However, the most common and most likely perpetrator is, the victim definitely knows, is quite often a family member or a friend of the family. It's just horrifically baffling. And I feel like the stuff that I have on Instagram is highly personal, just like this interview. The fact that the average age that a survivor shares their story is age 52 tells me that they don't feel comfortable until because it might break up the family, or and then it's your fault that you broke up the family because you told. And so people are waiting till the perpetrator dies. This is ridiculous. In the meantime, all of the suffering is going on, and that's why I'm willing to be an open book if it helps anybody, which I think it is helping a few people. My healing wasn't linear, and I didn't actually see any hope of being healed, or I would have paid a little more attention to how I did it. It's not a step-by-step. It goes back and forth, and you practice a lot of internal dialogue. You need to battle the negative because of my inner critics in there from my abusers, where they're stuck in there, like they're just we're living in my head, and so just a lot of internal dialogue battles, which is like 95% better. But it just takes constant. Tell it to shut up. No, that's not true. No, this is true. And you say in your mind, to yourself. So, you tell it, no, that's not true. No, I'm a great person. I'm a nice person. I am not stupid. I'm not a loser. I am capable. It's okay if I make mistakes. I'm a human. It's okay. I don't have to be perfect. I cannot be perfect. It's impossible to be perfect. All that stuff. And whenever the negative comes up, throw in the positive again. And that's not positive thinking, right? That's different than, oh, everything's fine. Oh, let's just think of something positive. No, this is like a direct battle with the inner critic, the beatdown, the battle, the war that goes on, because it's not going to shut up, but you keep battling it and it gets slowly shrinks. That's my experience. To keep at it. Don't listen to your inner critic, and I had no idea this was going to be so emotional, but I feel very strongly about this. I definitely convey myself. I feel like a little bit better through some of my posts, but that's what you get when you have a person with a busy mind who this is at the forefront of my goals, is to help survivors and hopefully to get the statistics knocked down on the average age that a survivor shares their story, and hopefully we can get some of these perpetrators to stop, or to at least do it less. I mean, we got to be able to do something. So I'm on the bandwagon with Jan and you and as many people as possible to get on this bandwagon until something changes.
Yeah, well, you're a contributor to helping that change.
Yeah, one of many voices.
I can't thank you enough.
We gotta keep shouting it.
I think the things that you have talked about and shared are so impactful and so helpful that I hope you feel like you've done some good, because I definitely feel that way. I think there are thousands of people who are going to hear this and relate and know what you're talking about and agree with you. And it's talking about this that really has started to make an impact on our society. And like you say, the hope is that we can cut down on the prevalence level. I mean, I don't think there's ever any way to prevent totally 100%. If we can make a big enough impact that we are lessening the prevalence and also putting the people who are perpetrators somewhere where they can't perpetrate someone else, whether that's jail or a mental health facility or something, get them away from ability to perpetrate, then I think we're making a change. You're a contributor to that, and I appreciate it. I think what you've done here
Oh,
is
well, you
amazing.
too, Dave. Well, just keep at it,
Yeah, it takes a lot to do what you've done today. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and let's even stay in touch and talk about the possibility of talking more again sometime in the future.
Okay, that sounds great. All right.
Carrie, what are you going to do for the rest of the day to help you come down from the emotional responses that you've had in talking about all this?
I'm going to go play with the kitties. There's 5. I'm going to change my clothes, which will help. I purposely wore some things to get myself in this mode. And I haven't eaten breakfast yet, so that'll be good. And hang out with my adopted family here. No, my friends, but I've known them 20 years, so it's like part of my chosen family. And I'm going to get online and try to help people.
Well, that's awesome. I think the fact that you actually have a plan and a foresight into what you want to do after this is healing in and of itself. It will put you in a different mindset if you are able to follow through with those things. So do you feel like you're capable now of moving forward and going into the future with those plans?
Definitely. And there's always the magic of music.
Great.
There's always that.
Yeah, that's
always
true.
Guaranteed. I can pick any type of song or anything and go right to wherever I want to go. So There's always that. I am not worried.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that.
All right.
I appreciate you. And we'll be in touch.
All right. I'll talk to you soon, Dave. Thanks you so much.
Thanks, Carrie. All right. Bye.
Okay.
That does it for another episode of Sexual Assault Survivor Stories, the SAS podcast. I want to give my personal thanks to Carrie for agreeing to be on my show and for her daily contributions to bringing justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. I also want to thank you, my listeners, for being here with me each week. It's exciting for me to watch my subscription numbers go up and to know that you're sharing these episodes with your family, friends, and coworkers. Keep it up. I love the support. Don't forget to rate this episode and to subscribe to SAS if you haven't already. I also want to encourage you to do all you can to bring justice to victims and survivors of rape and sexual assault. The best way to do that is to start by believing, because we all know someone whose life has been affected by rape or sexual assault. We'll see you next week.